Welcome to this interview by Core Recruitment. Thank you very much for joining us. We're doing an interview series with business leaders to inject some positivity into the marketplace. And these are meant to be 20 to 30-minute snapshots of these business leaders and what they're doing currently and their take on the current marketplace. We've done a number of these interviews and they're all visible on our website, www.corerecruitment.com. And if you've got a really great business leader or inspirational person within your organization who you think needs to talk up, then please get in touch with me, Christian@corerecruitment.com, and let me know who that person is, and hopefully we can get them involved as well. Now, we're really lucky to be joined today by Eric, who is one of the founders from Eden, amongst multiple other projects, who's going to be chatting to us today. Hi, Eric. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm
Doing,
I'm doing well.
doing well.
Uh,
Great.
I'm looking forward to the holidays. Typically, I wouldn't normally say that, but we've been working. The team and I, and them more so than myself, have been working some pretty intense hours lately.
I can imagine. Well, we'll get on to why you are working so hard at the moment. You've been involved in some very successful lifestyle concepts. I guess if you could take us through a couple of those and also kind of where you find your inspiration from to get us kicked off, that would be amazing.
No, no. Listen, but interestingly, by my very first large concept that we launched was a concept called Lock. And for kind of the viewers who aren't familiar with it, I would say it was kind of like the Hoxton has a baby with Airbnb. Um, Interestingly, my background is not hospitality. My background was real estate, and I ended up in 2013 more by accident, or I guess self-preservation, having launched a concept called Urban Villa because we couldn't find an operator to partner with. And then Urban Villa eventually, as a result of Urban Villa, Oak Tree Capital approached us, shortly thereafter and said, what you've done there, can you do that for us here? And so the team and I were parachuted into 2015 to, I guess, kind of address some of their challenges that they were facing, and we were given a little bit of money to launch a new brand, and so the very first lock was open in 2015, and I stayed there for 9.5 years. I still like to tell people I'm not a hotelier, but I guess that after 10 years of kind of overseeing the scaling of Lock, and I think we launched a second concept called Cove. By the time we left, we had 26 hotels across Europe, and it was an incredible learning experience. It was challenging, and I learned a lot what to do, what not to do. But it kind of opened my eyes to the fact that although I'm not a hotelier, I do love the industry.
Absolutely. I mean, I think 26 hotels probably makes you a hotelier, Eric. I hate to out you like that in the middle of an interview, but it's kind of like it's a thing, right? For those who don't know you as well, just like real estate in terms of like your background, could you just give us like a snapshot of career history kind of prior to that?
Yeah, I used to work with a investment group, and we were kind of sector agnostic as long as it was limited to real estate. So we invested in residential, student housing, care homes. We did a few hotels while we were there as well. We did a hostel um, across the US, and then eventually in early 2009, 2010, I moved to the UK to open up our London office. I think during my time here in the UK, especially during the first early years, we realized that if we wanted to generate the returns we wanted to generate, we had to have some very specific sector knowledge. So we spent a fair amount of money and time studying the hospitality market through a US lens. And that's when we discovered, I'd say kind of two things. One is as early as 2010, we realized that there was a shortage of extended stay inventory here in England. You could increase extended stay stock by 4 times, and you'd be undersupplied versus the US. 8 times, you'd be undersupplied versus East Asia. And then the other shortage we noticed was lifestyle hotels. You had a handful of lifestyle hotel concepts in 2010, but compared to New York, you could increase lifestyle product by 20x, and you'd be undersupplied versus New York. And so Urban Villa, Lock, I wish I could say that they were deliberate, kind of seeing the magic by, kind of identifying the intersection between extended stay and lifestyle. Really, it just came down to the fact that we couldn't make up our mind. And so launched a concept that kind of ticked both boxes.
I love the way you're oversimplifying that. I'm sure there was more to it than just the hopped in an Airbnb had a baby. Because I mean, that's a mental image I'm going to have to deal with for a while. But that's pretty interesting. I mean, one of the things. I mean, the crowd is fickle, and consumer trends come and go. And one of the things that strikes me with the concepts that you've developed is that in terms of like projects management, in terms of actually getting something open, doing the real estate deals and all of that kind of stuff, that can take a couple of years. Then the build, the construction, all that kind of stuff takes a while. And then it actually has to be relevant when it actually launches and be relevant for years kind of after that as well. So, from a trends perspective, when you look elsewhere in the world in terms of like, where you get your inspiration from, is it America? Are there other markets that you look at as well?
That's a good question. I think for a very long time, much of my inspiration came from New York. Um, I think it goes without saying that I would fly to New York, and you would get a pretty clear picture on which concepts would eventually make their way to London. And for a long time, whenever we needed design inspiration, and a lot of the interior designers that we worked with were actually based in New York. So I'd take my design team, we would fly out to New York, typically over a 2-day period. I'd put them through the ringer. We'd go and visit, 30, 40 different concepts. And by the time they came home, they'd be broken. But it was always a reliable litmus test on what was going to happen here. I would say that since COVID, I'm not entirely certain that New York is. You can still see a lot of what will happen, but I would say that it's not the single spot that is
Mm.
defining what's happening going forward. We're getting inspiration from places like Toronto, Los Angeles. Uh, I mean, even European locations like Berlin, Paris. Uh, I think for the first time in a very long time, you're seeing some action in places like uh, and I hate to say this. I mean, I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but places like Dubai and Australia, you just would have never kind of mentioned those words when talking about kind of disruptive hospitality, because typically they were 10, 20 years behind. But part of that is because the consumer has changed over the last 5 years.
Absolutely. Why do you think that's because a lot of people say this about Dubai now, and like we've recruited in Dubai for a number of years, and my opinion of it has very much changed. To me, London used to be the place that if you wanted to disrupt, if you wanted to inspire, if you wanted to kind of like, really elevate yourself, London was it. And I think ever since Brexit, I don't know if that's been the same vibe in London. And to me, it's kind of like if you want to, not that the streets are paved with gold in Dubai, I definitely don't think that. But if you want to, well, maybe they are, but it's kind of like, some streets, but I guess stop speaking, but it's kind of like, but it's one of those places that kind of like that feels like if you were an aspirational person, that feels like where you'd want to go, right?
Listen, I think that there are two sides to this. When it comes to innovation, innovation comes from disruption. Disruption comes from experimentation. Experimentation comes from the willingness to try something new and fail. And the more that you're willing to innovate and fail, and the more times that you fail, as long as you have the right framework, you can learn from those failures. Um, Unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, COVID has led to a lot of failed companies. It was kind of unrelenting, and in response to that, a lot of the investors have become a lot more risk averse. Now, the two micro locations that didn't close in response to COVID were Dubai and Tulum. I mean, there were a few others. But what that meant was that the investors who had invested in those micro locations don't have the same memory, so to speak, as the ones that had invested in places like London, New York, San Francisco, LA, where everything was shut down, and you had these 2-year stretch of uh, open, close. The distance between you,
Distance.
which listen, it doesn't matter how much money you throw at the consumer. The reality is a lot of those. I don't know of a single company that wasn't impacted by that.
Yeah.
But and in response to the governments having basically foot the bill for that 2-year period, there's now they're trying to recoup the losses. And some of it is through higher taxation, some of it is through more regulatory hurdles. And so it's making it a lot more challenging in some of these micro locations to be a lot more experimental. Rising labor costs, rising higher borrowing costs. Um, and so, you're not seeing as much innovation, but there is one area where you're seeing a lot of innovation. And I'd say that that one area is wellness. I'd say
Yeah.
that you're seeing that happen in New York. You're seeing it happen in Los Angeles. You're seeing it now picking up steam. I'd say that as it relates to wellness, we're probably a few years behind New York, maybe 3, 4, 5 years behind New York. And that's where a lot of the innovation's happening at the moment.
Nice. Before we come on to the next question, which is about customer experience, just sticking with that trends thing for a second, we've all got kind of a property or a place or somewhere that we go. I know which mine is, and where you kind of think, oh my God, there could be 100 of these, but they haven't done it. Or it's kind of like, it's mom and pop owned, or you wish it was never kind of, it's just a beautiful thing. From those markets that you were talking about or elsewhere, like where's your beautiful thing? Where do you think is the place that kind of like you go to and your soul feels at ease?
Um, there were a few beautiful things. I think when they first opened, I would say that right now they're beginning to expand. I think you become a victim of your own success. So the first beautiful thing, and a lot of people have heard me say this on podcasts, was the original Othership um, experience in Toronto that my sister took me to for one of my birthdays one day. I thought she was going to take me to Vegas, to New York, to Miami, to Tulum. And I found out the other day we were going to Toronto, and I was like, "Why are we going to Toronto?" And she's like, "You're going to love this place." When we landed, we were with a couple of friends. I I looked at the agenda she had created for my birthday, and it said 9 p.m. we're going to Othership. So I go and look up Otherships, thinking it's a nightclub, and I found out that it was a wellness concept. And I got pretty angry because I needed a night out. I'd been working hard. I was a bit I needed a blowout. So I thought I thought it was like some form of intervention. So I was like, why are we going there? Her name's Shiva. Why are we going there at 9 p.m. at night? Can we reschedule it to a little bit earlier? She's like, no, we can't. Well, anyways, being the stubborn guy that I was, I went to Othership earlier that day and I asked them, I said, listen, my sister booked this. I was wondering if we could take one of the earlier slots. And the guy starts laughing. He's like, you're obviously not from here, are you? I was like, no. He's like, These slots were fully booked, yeah, over a month ago." So, okay, that's interesting. I was like, and then, my brain started shifting from I want a party to the numbers. And I asked the next question, which is just curious, how many slots do you guys have a day? And he's like, oh, we've got about uh, 15 slots a day. And I was like, well, how many people per slot? They're like, oh, around 50 people per slot. And then I asked, how much, and I turned to my sister, how much did you pay for this? She's like, yeah, I paid about 45, $50 Canadian dollars. So my brain's going through all the numbers. And I'm like, what is this place? And so we came back at 9 p.m. and it was it was this kind of, it felt a little bit like a cocktail bar, had an amazing music program, some of the best music I've heard in a long time, amazing lighting, amazing design, but instead of being a cocktail bar, it was like this large communal sauna. And I remember my sister telling me at 9 o'clock, she goes, listen, we can stay here for an hour, and if after an hour you want to leave, you're more than not welcome to leave. And I was like, okay. And so I was like, well, just plan on us leaving, Shiva, because yeah, I want to go out. And so during that hour, I noticed everyone's talking to one another and the music's getting better. And then all of a sudden, and they did a little bit of breath work. And then 15 minutes into it, they're like, okay, time for the cold plunge. And there's beautiful people there and everyone's outgoing. And I remember I was like, I'm not doing a cold plunge. And then a few of the people we met were like, nah, come on. And, I guess I did it out of peer pressure. And I'll never forget the emotion that crossed my mind when I came out of the cold plunge. And I'd been searching for, I'd been wrestling with this idea that the Gen Z consumed 79% less alcohol than any other generation before it. And yet, alcohol for since the beginning of time has served as one of the eminent social lubricants for
Hmm.
time. It's probably the only reason my wife's married to me. Um, and and yet at that moment, you had such a high coming out of the cold plunge with the music, with the curation. I had realized that this specific group of people had figured out that the cold plunge for them was their social lubricant. And that was a big eye opener for me. Um, when you're as pushing yourself, when you're an entrepreneur and you're working crazy hours, um, you need an outlet. And the reality is, over time, you begin to realize there's only so many nights you can go out before alcohol or doing a wild night out begins to impair your productivity. And so being able to identify something else to supplement going out, not necessarily replacing it altogether, was a big eye opener for me. Um, and so after an hour, my sister looked at me. She's like, "Hey, we can go." And I remember sitting there going, yeah, everyone's beautiful. Everyone's so outgoing. I feel like I've taken a drug. And the music's amazing. We could leave here and go somewhere where the music's not as good. People aren't as outgoing. People aren't as beautiful, and my high probably won't feel as good. And then I was like, I begrudgingly, I was like, okay, you're right. I'm wrong. Let's stay. And then we went back two more times, and over the next 2 days.
Wow, that's incredible. I mean, I am taking everything you said away from that, but your sister on your birthday put together an
I
agenda for
know.
your thing. I mean,
I know. I love my sis.
that's
Yeah,
that's
I love
next
my sis.
level.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, I love my sis. Amazing. We're best. She's 7 years younger than me, but 10 years more mature. We're best friends. So I learned a lot from her. She learns a lot from me. Interestingly, we both found her. She used to be a fund manager at Citadel, and before that worked at Goldman. But she's kind of found a passion for the whole wellness thing as well, seemingly along the same time that I did.
that's phenomenal. Really, really, really good. So look, customer experience is the kind of like, next topic that I wanted to talk about, and using customer experience to build loyalty kind of specifically. So when you're designing kind of like a proposition with all of those different touch points, all of those different kind of like, things, again, thinking 10 years in advance when you're looking at technology and all of that kind of side of things as well, how do you even start putting all of that together?
It's a good question. I listen, I think if you speak to it, if you ask a hotelier how they go about defining a brand and the customer journey, they define it through a set of features. The room size has to be 30 square meters. You need breakfast to be served at this tower. This is what's served at breakfast. You need a spa. And so it's all about a set of features. And yet we've all been we've all heard time and time again through Simon Sinek or Steve Jobs that consumers don't think in features. They think in how a product makes them feel.
Yeah.
Does this product understand me? Does it understand my tribe? Um, I the and I guess I was lucky in a couple of different areas because no one would partner with me. I was forced to, I guess, create our own hotel, our own brand, if you want to call it that. And because I was encumbered with this thought process that this is how brands work, I created a concept that met my own needs. And it just so happened there were hundreds of thousands of other people that thought like I do, whose needs weren't being met by hospitality. Now, this is the irony. By most, I mean, you look at the number of sub brands within Marriott, I lose count. Right? I don't know how many brands they've got now, Hilton, IHG, and yet I can unequivocally say today that if I were to share with you my 24-hour day and and the needs that need to have met during that 24-hour day, not a single one of those brands currently meet my needs. And they didn't 15 years ago either. See, 15 years ago, what is it that I cared about? Well, when I was traveling, I'd want to stay 4 or 5 days or longer. And because I wanted to stay 4 or 5 days or longer, there were certain habits I'd become accustomed to that I wanted to maintain. I cared about my third wave coffee. I cared about Instagrammable spaces, but I also, recognized that from time to time I wanted to eat at home. I didn't want to eat out. I also wanted to, do a gym routine from time to time, and I needed a place to do co-working from. And so you look back at those features today, they all seem obvious, but at the time, none of the hotels could cater towards any of those needs. The coffee was terrible, design was uninspiring, there was no co-working space, so on and so forth. If you would ask me today what my habits are, and ironically, I thought it was just me, and we've spent the last 2 years as a team really digging below the target consumer and realizing that there's hundreds of thousands that think like I do today. Um, it's what the FT calls the wellness anarchist. There's an article written on this a few weeks ago. You know, we get up, we'll meditate for 10 minutes, we might take a peptide, some of us might fast. Um, all of us are working out at least an hour a day, either whether it's a HIIT class, yoga, CrossFit, strength training. Strength training is the biggest, one of the biggest kind of indicators to longevity. We want to eat organic food. We want to eat food that's seed oil free. We want to make sure our water is microplastic free. Most of us are eating earlier in the evening, so we don't want to eat a heavy meal at 9 p.m. at night. We'd rather eat it at 6. We need the room to be cool. I could just go through the long list of things that um, this consumer needs. This consumer being me, this consumer being my sister, this consumer being every one of almost the team members that work for me. And not a single hotel is catering to our needs. And so so when I refer to the customer journey, when you're looking at the consumer as opposed to the features, you realize the consumer's deals and needs evolve over time. And it's actually quite easy to ensure that your product evolves to meet the consumer needs. It's not that hard. It's not like the consumer all of a sudden changes overnight. They just incrementally change. And before you know it, if you're not monitoring that, what your product is and what the customer needs are just vastly different.
Absolutely. I've got to say, there was a concept that I saw a long time ago, well, not a long time ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, Zoku, which is in Amsterdam. And that had kind of like bedroom accommodation wise, I've got to say, it wasn't quite the level that you're kind of like talking about, but they had the co-working space and the co-eating space and all that kind of stuff. But they did a really interesting thing at kind of 7 o'clock every day. So if you imagine all the tech geeks sitting typing away at their laptops with their kind of like alcohol-free beers, kind of like, drinking away, they would all go and sit at their laptops and type away. And literally at kind of like, 6 o'clock, there'd be a cookery demonstration. And they would all get up and they'd stand at the back with their kind of like all wearing the same trainers, kind of like with their beer, having kind of like watching the cookery demonstration. And they'd watch it. And then suddenly they'd serve the food and they'd all communally serve around and kind of like eating all that kind of stuff. And then literally at 7 o'clock, they'd go straight back over to their laptops and type away again. But they felt like they'd had the social interaction. They'd been part of the tribe. They'd been that thing. I think it's a slightly different subsector to the tech wellness geek sector that I've just described versus the aspirational wellness individual that you've just described. But it's just amazing that they designed obviously a concept that was kind of like all about that. And I was always really surprised that that concept didn't explode and kind of go anywhere. Because if I had money on that, I would definitely put it on that because they all seemed very happy with that hour-long interaction that they actually had because it made them feel obviously special, which was a good thing to do. On that note, we're
But I think
obviously
before, just on that note, the founder is a good friend of mine, Hans. I remember the day I resigned from Eden, I actually went and spent a few days with him in the Dutch countryside. He's brilliant. The one thing I would say about Hans that I really give him credit for is that he did come from a hotel background, and yet he didn't let that he and allowed that background to give him the framework to be innovative. And that really takes a different mind. Most people who come from a hotel background, come from any background, Ben Horowitz says this all the time. If you want to disrupt hospitality, you need someone from outside of hospitality to partner with. You want to disrupt healthcare, if you want to disrupt automotive, don't bank on it coming from within. And yet Hans was the exception. And you're right, his product's brilliant. And I think that concept will scale over time. I think he's just been very deliberate about his growth, which isn't necessarily a bad thing.
no, I completely agree. As I said, well, growing the beautiful thing without strangling the beautiful thing is kind of a, it's a skill set.
Difficult.
Yeah, it's very difficult. So the hotel market in London is especially congested. There's so many 4 and 5 star hotels. I'm not saying congested with good things, Eric. I saw the eyebrow. But but it is specifically kind of like congested. What do you think there is space for new players? And if so, what kind of concept would that be? And I know this is a loaded question.
Um, I was told 15 years ago that the London hotel market was congested. I was told it again 10 years ago and then 5 years ago. Listen, let's talk specifics. As of today, there's 153,000 hotel rooms. There's 11,000 service apartments. Of those 11,000 service apartments, I'd say only 1,500 to 2,000 are upper upscale and above. The type of place that you and I would want to stay. Um, that if you compare that to New York, you could increase supply by 4x and you'd be undersupplied. Now, what's most interesting about that statistic is the following. If you look at the number of people who are coming to London, staying 1 to 3 nights from abroad versus the number of people staying 4 nights or more, the what the stats will tell you is that there are more people coming to London staying for 4 nights or more than there is 1 to 3 nights.
Hmm.
So what does that tell you? That tells you that there's 143,000 hotel rooms that are designed to cater towards the person staying 1 to 3 nights, and there's only 11,000 units, of which 1,500 to 2,000 are decent, which are designed to cater towards those staying 4 nights or longer. And those staying 4 nights or longer are the wealthiest consumers.
Yeah.
They're the ones with the biggest buying power. Every one of those international consumers, on average, from Chinese, Indian, US, even European, are staying 4 nights or longer. They don't want to stay in a hotel. And so now the issue is there, what I created with Lock, we did about almost 2,000 units across London. Um, do I believe that's the future? Like I said, I'm proud of what we did at Lock. However, I will say that wellness is infinitely more important today than it was even 3 years ago. Now, here's the problem. When you speak to someone within hospitality and they hear the words wellness, it begins to drum up images of someone lying by the pool by themselves waiting to get a massage. And yet, if you speak to our target consumer, which is anyone between 25 and 55 who is from a metropolitan city, and ask them, someone who's not from the industry, about the words wellness, it's literally the exact opposite image that's drummed up in their mind. It's Barry's Boot Camp, it's Soul Cycle, it's high octane, it's communal, it's experiential. You're leaving having been hit with a dopamine high, not a serotonin low.
Hmm.
One of them's for decompression and escape. The other one's to feel more alive. And as it relates to the latter type of concept, today the only concept that I'm aware of that's really targeting doing anything like this is Zero, which is once again birthed in Dubai, which surprises me. Um, and apparently the rate is insane at the moment. They had a rough start at the beginning, but apparently they're killing it now.
Wow. Now, you mentioned your sister as being somebody that you learn a lot from and take some stuff from as well, and the different sectors that you've worked in as well. But and I know that you're connected to lots of different people, but either from somebody that you've directly worked with or other people within the sector, who do you get your inspiration from, and like who do you kind of like really aspire to be?
It's a good question. I that changes on a daily basis, to be candid with you. I don't have a very clear answer on that. I think it really depends on the facet. I admire and all the people that I admire, and I explain this to my wife all the time. The people I admire them because they suffer from an imbalance. And as a result of them suffering from that imbalance is what leads to them having that amazing level of ingenuity. I mean, when you speak about some of the most disruptive people, people like Elon and Steve, within their personal lives were in shambles, and I have no desire to emulate. their personal lives. In fact, to the contrary, my desire is to try to create something that's meaningful, something that's impactful, but not at the expense of, being a supporting husband and a good father. And that's a challenge in and of itself. Um, but I think the people that I've always held the most admiration for are those who don't play by the playbook. Um, and ideally those who are polymaths, people who have interests in multiple different fields. I'm obviously I would be lying if I told you I wasn't, in my early days when wasn't heavily inspired by what Balaz did with Marmont and with the Standard. I mean, there are a lot of things that people take for granted now, but which at the time were just incredibly um, almost before its time. Same with Alex
Mm.
Calderwell with Ace. Um, yeah, Ian Schrager when him and Steve Rebell had the thought of taking Studio 54 and putting it into the Executive Hotel, which is now known as Morgan Hotel. I think, um, yeah, I have so much appreciation for people who don't just copy others.
Yeah.
And they obviously took elements from other fields and applied it to hospitality. Um, and that's where a lot of innovation comes from. It's taking two different uh, crafts that typically have nothing to do with one another and finding the intersection between the two crafts. Steve Jobs did it with calligraphy and tech, or the arts and tech. Um, yeah, and so I, but I also recognize the limitation of all of these individuals, and I try to learn from the limitations. I love. I mean, this is one of the things I do love that we live in the era of the podcast today. Um, and there's so many podcasts that I love listening to, not necessarily because I think these are idols that we should follow, but because people are asking hard questions. I love the questions that Tim Ferriss asks. I love the questions that Chris Williamson asks. I love the questions that Andrew Huberman asks. Do I agree with everything that is said on the show? No. Um, but do I like the fact that it stimulates my mind to think about something that is completely unrelated to my field? Absolutely. And where I find myself more often than not is that something that catches my interest that has nothing to do with my field eventually over time comes full circle to almost define my field. And I find that very fascinating.
That's a very good answer. Thank you for that. Now, one of the things with working in recruitment for as long as I've worked in recruitment, don't ask how long, is that you have interviewed a lot of people in the UK and been fortunate enough to meet a lot of people internationally as well. And one of the things that kind of doesn't fascinate me, but it's kind of like always quite apparent culturally, is that people in the UK have a real problem with failure and admitting failure. And I think when failure is something that comes up, it's kind of like they take it very personally. Whereas when you interview an American, it's almost like their failure is a badge of honor that you tried something and it didn't get there and all of this kind of stuff as well. But they're much prouder of their achievements and their failures as well. Everything's slightly more extreme. But not every day is a sunny day. But can you tell us about an instance where maybe you didn't get 100% of what you want, or maybe the F word came up?
I've never gotten 100% of what I want. I think people often ask me about how I felt about my lock days, and I am proud of what I did. But when you Mozart says it best when he says there's what you hear, which obviously you appreciate, and then there's what's played in my head. And what's played in my head is what you hear, unfortunately, is only 30-40% of what's played in my head. And with Locke, I very much felt that way for a long time. That although I was proud of what I created, it was 50-60% of what I wanted it to be. But because I suffered from imposter syndrome and I didn't really think I almost, surrounded by Harvard grads and Ivy League and on one side, and on the other side, people who had been in the hospitality industries for 20, 30 year plus. More often than not, up until only a few years ago, I kind of thought, well, what am I doing here? I don't belong here. Um, and so, uh, the irony is, Christian, that the greatest innovation happened earliest in that trajectory when we didn't have all of the support, we didn't have the greatest minds in the room. because we didn't know any better and we just kept on experimenting and kept on making mistakes. And those mistakes is what led to the greatest innovation. It was later on that we started, bringing in a lot of big names, and that innovation started declining because, as you rightly pointed out, um, people became a lot more risk averse. People became a lot more fearful of failure, and they'd throw the baby out with the bathwater. That didn't answer your question. I've failed on a number of occasions. I'd say that two that biggest failures. One of them is a hostel that I was part of, 14, 13, 14 years ago in Liverpool. It was a great idea, but it failed spectacularly. I learned that the hostel concept is good on the condition that you're able to fill midweek trade. But people typically, leisure consumers, don't go to Liverpool to stay in hostels. So you had the weekends that were busy, but midweek was dead.
I'm cutting in
And then
slightly, but two words I never thought that I would associate you with Eric were Liverpool and hostel. So I mean, I just
yeah,
don't know,
yeah.
don't know why.
Um, the second project, which and I've got to be careful here, but it just didn't do as well as I would have hoped. And it was a beautiful property. It's one of my favorite locks, but it's the one in Manchester. And who knows, maybe Alistair is doing a lot better job of it today. It just never got to its potential. But I think part of it, candidly, Christian, was I assumed that because there was a northern quarter and because there were hipsters in Manchester, that there would be a demand for a hipster concept. What I didn't realize is that, yeah, sure, there's a northern quarter. There weren't that many hipsters traveling to Manchester, let alone staying 4 days or longer. The depth of the demand just never there. And so I've realized that I'm good at good. I I wouldn't say good. I understand how to create concepts in cities like London. For no other reason than these are the types of cities, London, Dublin, Madrid, Lisbon, Paris, Berlin, because these are the cities that my tribe travels to, and a lot of them, and their needs aren't being met.
So
With
can I ask you a
respect to
quick?
Liverpool and Manchester, unfortunately, I don't seem to understand the consumer as well.
So circling back a little bit on the on something that you said, kind of like on imposter syndrome, because I personally think everybody suffers from imposter syndrome somewhere, kind of like in their career, in their day, in their kind of like everything, because we're all trying to be parents and business people, and blah 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 blah. You're not going to be great at everything, right? But how do you deal with it, and do you still get it?
Yeah, 100%. I still deal with it. How do I deal with it? Today, candidly, we live in one of the greatest eras because now every time I have a question, I can go to ChatGPT and go, help educate me. So no question's too dumb. And not listen, ChatGPT is not perfect. It's only as good as the quality of the prompt and as good as the amount of time you invest in it to train a ChatGPT. But I found that at least it helps me suffer from imposter syndrome just a little bit less.
So knowledge is what you use to balance your imposter
Yeah,
syndrome.
yeah, knowledge. Yeah, I don't think I'll ever not suffer from imposter syndrome. I didn't. Once again, I didn't go to the Ivy League. I didn't in schools. I didn't go. I didn't work for a big hotel brand. So there's always going to be an element of my thinking that just won't resonate with the mainstream way of thinking.
Okay, understood. I think there's a whole different interview in that, but I'm going to stick to the subject of the day. So obviously, not obviously, but you have a new concept that you are bringing to London. Don't know how much you can talk about it, but the question that I'm going to lead into with that is about investment houses. And like within the sector, they have a bit of a mixed reputation in terms of kind of being able to partner with them. So like in terms of kind of like, for creative founders or individuals who are looking to partner with one, I guess what advice would you give them? And what, I mean, I can imagine there was a stage of your career when you were chasing them. I can very much imagine now that they are chasing you. So what do you look for kind of like, in a potential partner, and what advice would you give to others?
Um, if you haven't read The Hard Thing About the Hard Things, I'd recommend reading it. It's written by Ben Horowitz, who's one of the founders of Andreessen Horowitz, which is one of the most successful VC funds on the planet. He says something quite interesting, which is when you're interviewing um, for team members, never give them too much about your concept up front because you want and about your values and about your way of thinking. Spend the first hour or two understanding how they think, how they govern, how they manage first, and let through their disclosure dictate whether there's alignment there or not. And I would say the same goes for funding. You have to find a capital partner from a long-term perspective that thinks like you do. Now, when you're creating a new concept, candidly, you kind of need to know whether the capital partner gets the big picture. Are they ideally your target market? Because if they aren't, they're whether they say they're going to be hands off or not on a new concept, that's just it's just it's not going to happen. No matter how experienced you are, everyone's got a point of view. So the ideal intersection of finding a great partner is finding a partner who looks at your concept and goes, "Shit, I'm part of that tribe, and my needs aren't currently not being met. I would stay here." And the moment they say, "I would stay here," that's when you know you've got the right partner. Now it's a difficult one, right? If you're trying to launch a hostel concept, it's a challenge because the private equity manager is probably not staying in hostels, but maybe one day they did, and maybe in the back of their mind they're thinking, this would have been amazing during the time that I was traveling. Um, See, the reality is, we all, as investors, they all want to pretend like this that the spreadsheet is what dictates everything. And post COVID, what has happened? You pre-COVID, you had a situation where people were just growth for growth's sake,
Hmm.
and there was excess, and people were hiring too many people. There was just no regard for the bottom line. Um, People were focused on the top line growth. And rightly, what happened post COVID is that the accountants have kind of taken the reins and they've been focused on the bottom line. Um, and so funders have become infinitely more risk averse. And so it's a lot harder today to launch a new concept than it's been in a very long time. But I see that as a positive. I see that as if you can create something now in the current climate, you've got quite a moat because everyone's saying they're going to do something, but you're pulling it off in the current climate is a lot harder than it's been in a very long time.
Excellent. Very good answer. Now, if you could go back to your younger self and other than just cold plunge, give yourself one piece of advice or one wall that you hadn't run into and all of that kind of stuff. I mean, what would you go back and kind of like say to yourself?
There's a lot I would say to myself, I was an idiot. Um, but I think there was three things. One is when you're growing a company from, let's say, 5 million of EBITDA to 200 million of EBITDA, that journey is a very painful journey. And the challenges that you face from 5 to 20 million are very different than the challenges you face from 20 to 50 and so on and so forth. And they're different skill sets. Um, and those skill sets are very different than the skill set associated with making your way up a corporate ladder of an organization that's already worth 2 billion. So the first thing I'd say is that um, I I would be careful bringing in too many big name uh, players again, executives too early on in the agenda in that journey. We knew we were going to get to a 2 billion evaluation at some point, and so we brought in a lot of those team members early on. But yet, and I never appreciated, none of those people had any experience growing from 0 to 200. It is a very specific skill set, and there is no easy way to do it. It's incredibly painful. And it's hard every step of the way. And unfortunately, there's two challenges with it. One of them is you can't just take someone from a larger company and put them in. And unfortunately, and the people that are brilliant from 0 to 50, who legitimately can say, if it wasn't for me,
Yeah,
whoever that, you wouldn't be where you are today. They may not be, and in a lot of cases, are not suitable for the company when the company goes from 50 to 100.
absolutely.
But the challenge is these are some of your best friends. They were there in the trenches. Um, the issue is the longer you hold on to those individuals, um, the more toxic it can be because they're struggling to find their place. They don't like the fact that it's changing. They keep on pining back to a time when things were simpler. And the longer you hold on to those individuals, the worse it is for them and the worse it is for the company. So that's the first bit of advice. I would say the second bit of advice, and it's one that I'm still kind of wrestling with today. When you're trying to scale an organization, much like a chess match, you're trying to map out the 50,000 things that could go wrong, and you're trying to at all times think about how you address all those 50,000 issues. Um, and in the process of doing so, you burn yourself out because there's no way you can be a great chess player, but the reality is you can't foresee every single move and
Yeah.
issue that will occur. And what I'm working on at the moment is making sure I give myself some headspace every day, some time to just think and not worry about trying to solve everything, but just let my brain just decompress so that at that moment in time when something comes up, I have the free time to go, okay, so and so's come up. How do we creatively address this? And every day you got to be prepared for the next thing that could destroy your company. And it's just
What is
part
that?
of
Is
the
that
entrepreneurial life.
cycling? Is it swimming? Is it, I mean, for me, is it sitting in a dark room with a bottle rocking back and forth? I mean, like what's the half hour?
For me, it's in a sauna. That's what works for me. Sometimes it's in the gym. For me, it's wellness based. It's
Yeah,
and sometimes it's just kind of going for a walk. But
yeah,
it's putting your phone down, not just being not checking social media. The issue with that is that there's an uncertainty to that, and as human beings, we hate uncertainty.
yeah.
We need something to do at all times, which is why social media is so addictive. But I recognize how addictive my personality is, and I've even I pay for an app, £80 every 6 months to prevent myself from accessing social media 10 hours a day. So that's how weak I am that I have to do that because I recognize that the knee-jerk response is to go to that as opposed to just sit there in silence and go, okay, let's just think.
And is that all nighttime hours? Just asking.
Uh, During the day and at night at both. So I give myself like 2, 3 hours during the day where I could go to it if I wanted to. So I haven't cut it out completely.
Nice. And sorry, what was the third thing?
The third thing is things always take longer than you think they're going to, and just plan for the fact that if you think it's going to take 5 years, it'll probably take 10, and that's okay. The reality is our parents when they were younger had a life expectancy of 60 to 70. I think there's a high likelihood our life expectancies could be 120 plus. So what's the rush?
Yeah, 100%. That's a very, very, very good point to finish on, Eric. I really enjoyed the chat. I really enjoyed all of the insight. Can't wait to see the new concept when it kind of like comes to London and you can talk about it in fully fledged form. I really enjoyed the chat and thank you for running over things.
Thanks a lot, Chris. Thanks for the time. Take care.